So this weekend I saw Unhinged, starring Russell Crowe, some people I didn't expect or know, and a pervasive sense of dread. And it was a theatrically released film, which is that's my bar right now. My experience leading up to the film was understandably cautious. I left as little exposed skin as possible. I brought some eye protection, and I got my snacks while gassing up to eat in advance before heading inside. The theater was sparsely populated. There were only like 3 other people in the room. Some of the posters were wistfully outdated, and others were updated ones for Tenet, The New Mutants, etc. Likewise, the trailers were for a hodgepodge of indefinitely delayed releases, including Morbius, or as I like to call it, Vampire Doctor Strange. So we open on a rainy night. Russell Crowe is popping pills in a car outside his ex-wife's new home. He whacks her and her new guy and then torches the place, which establishes both our title and our stakes pretty darn quick. Crowe's character is never actually named, and his backstory and the reasons for his madness, mental illness, being recently laid off from an auto plant without compensation, a divorce, are addressed mostly in a handful of exposition-heavy TV news interludes that still somehow don't mention him by name, which you'd think you'd want to do if you want everyone on high alert to catch this guy. So with that being said, I'll be calling him Mr. U. The opening credits play out over a montage of old footage of various incidents of road rage and assault in public. It's clearly trying to be timely, and yet the disconnected video and audio that you're hit with, people critiquing social media, distracted driving, general social malaise, is troublingly vague, and it comes across more like quaint fear-mongering about what a violent society we have to pad out the intro, instead of any specific point or message. I gotta provide a little bit of setup because this movie takes kind of a while to get going. We are introduced to our protagonist, Rachel, a recently divorced mom struggling to balance work and life as she takes care of her family, in particular her ex's son, Kyle. However, there's some other people who seem to live in the house, and it's not exactly clear who they are for a while. There's a young guy that I thought was another son, but it turns out that it's her younger brother, and then there's another woman who I thought was their daughter, and it turns out it's the brother's fiance. And then there's a grandmother who we see silently trying to figure out a video call for 10 seconds, and then she's just gone from the movie. Anyway, Rachel tries to take Kyle to school in their crummy car, and we very gradually, very obviously tease out their whole familial struggle. The relationship with the divorced dad, who, unseen, is tense. They get in gridlock, and then Rachel gets fired over the phone when she says she's going to be late to work. So she's desperate. She takes the nearest exit, and at the off-ramp, she ends up behind a guy who just won't go when the light turns green. So she honks at him a bunch, goes around him, only he follows her, and he pulls up, and it's Mr. U. He has her roll down a window, and he asks her to apologize for being rude, but in her own stressed-out state, she refuses. She snaps at him. The road rage is simmering, going back and forth, and then all of a sudden, he finally gets sinister, and he's like, "I will show you the true meaning of a bad day." And he intimidates them and the speeds off. But that is far from the end of it. And as the film continues, the body count rises, and Rachel has to figure out how to stop this lunatic who seems to know her every move and will stop at nothing to impress his own twisted sense of justice upon her. The film gets by on, I wouldn't say stunt casting, but without a big name in the villain role here, there really isn't much of a movie. It's a chicken and the egg situation as to whether Crowe landed this role in light of or irrespective of his noticeably ballooned build, or if he put on weight for the film. But regardless, he is memorably intimidating and unpredictable in this role, even if he can't seem to decide whether his accent should be a down-home Southern or a more Midwestern drawl. Crowe nails a character who, while painted in broad strokes, is very much a storming personification of entitled white guy rage, a blue-collar schlub with a death wish and a chip on his shoulder that can be seen from space. I'm not sure what Crowe's last, all-out villain role was. Maybe Sid 6.7 in Virtuosity, but here he almost seems to be channeling that frightening obsession that he had as the titular patriarch in the penultimate scenes of Darren Aronofsky's Noah. There's a scene where he quite literally tears into a divorce attorney for the perceived slight of screwing over men like him. However, the film can't seem to decide if Mr. U is just a dangerously ill MRA killing out of pure instinct and rage, or a Batman-tier criminal mastermind that was one step ahead of his prey, imitating voices and identities to get what he wants. At one point, he growls philosophically about seeking violence and retribution in a world that has wronged him, and at another point, he just runs over a guy he met a minute ago studio for pissing him off. And there's some creative and shocking violence, indeed, from both the good and the bad guy here, as well as some surprisingly intense car carnage, as has been given a fair amount of attention in the ad campaign, and is as befitting of the theme/moral question mark that road rage is bad. The film is all very vague, though. Like I said, Crowe's character, again, doesn't have a name. It's not even clear what Rachel does for a living for most of the film. I think she's a hairdresser. Where this even takes place is never specified. I thought it might be LA or Detroit or something. It looks a little tropical in one scene. Wherever it is, the traffic seems to go from open to a standstill as befits the current scene. And the details of the main characters' lives are all provided for flavor, but they don't really come around to much beyond the opening minutes. That's not to say that we should try to feel sympathetic for Mr. Yu, that's clearly not the point. But without that elaboration on his circumstances, what you're left with is essentially a riff on Duel crossed with Falling Down from the other side of things, which strains its runtime and a decent amount of logic when the rubber isn't meeting the road. There's a lot of foreshadowing, license plate here, a poorly placed phone with no password there, etc. It's telegraphed pretty heavily. Common sense kind of goes out the window in a few scenes to move things along. There's one point where Rachel asks a guy that she comes across to help her get Mr. Yu's license plate. But when the guy does it, he just audibly announces it and then brags to Mr. Yu about having memorized it, so guess what happens to him. There's also a moment where Mr. Yu is ramming her car from behind at a bumper-to-bumper stoplight and just doesn't apparently concern anybody else. Mr. Yu gets shot at least once and is seemingly no worse for the wear. He's kind of like a fat Terminator in the last half. Also, Kyle, her son, apparently doesn't have a cell phone. I guess that's sensible parenting these days. There's also an ill-defined tablet PC that gets brought up near the climax that then conveniently stops working immediately. Like any film from the last decade or so, great pains have to be taken to conveniently show the characters in situations where they can't call the police or use a cell phone. Although, to its credit, like Halle Berry's inferior Kidnap from the other year, it does a credit-worthy job of showing the characters try to contact authorities, but fail due to the inherent urgency of the situation and the villain's willingness to smash a cop or two. A couple things I did not expect in this movie. One, a, quote, new Fortnite strategy brought up by the kid in the first act becomes a critical epiphany to the characters surviving in the third act. That's, Chekhov's Fortnite, I guess. Two, the closing music, heading into the credits, is a spacey cover of Don't Fear the Reaper, which seems counterintuitive. Maybe Mr. Yu had a fever and he couldn't get his cowbell prescription in time. And also, I hate to say it, but if you're setting this movie in America with this kind of guy, he'd have a gun. I'm sorry. It's clear that this is avoided to allow for a little more creativity in the suspense scenes and I guess to prevent someone from getting on his tail faster when shots get fired. But he also ganks a guy in the middle of a diner and just drives off. So it's not like him going for a shooting too would have been that implausible. Also, there's an actor credited as Cop called Michael Papajohn, which is fitting since this is a film all about one madman's promise of a day of reckoning. Overall, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. As cat and mouse action suspense thrillers go, it's nothing revelatory, but Crowe in the lead takes such a unique turn that it polishes most of the script's pretty rough edges. Like with The Joker, don't go in expecting the most nuanced analysis of mental health and socioeconomic anxiety, no matter how much it might feign at that. This is one of the first films, if not the first, which is unofficially opening U.S. theaters back up beyond drive-ins and the occasional throwback screening. Apparently the studio was dead set on this not coming out on VOD instead, which is odd because in any other year I really think that this would have either been a late winter, early spring release or on the fast track to Amazon Video. I guess they're counting on there not being much competition, which is great because you can go on Twitter and say #1 movie in the country on Unhinged. But hey, after 6 months of not seeing anything in theaters, I'm not complaining. We got something new. I want to make it clear that I do appreciate that this film came out in theaters. It's a nice change of pace to have an R-rated original thriller with a modest budget on the big screen instead of another reboot, sequel, or superhero flick. As for whether you should go in at all to the theater, the ones around here where I live only just opened up last Friday, but I understand there's been some comparable rollouts across America. I've seen some folks in the industry online being very cautious, openly discouraging people do not go to theaters, do not see movies. But my advice is this, my measured advice is this. Stay home if you're feeling ill, obviously. But if you're up to it, wear a mask. Don't buy concessions. Maybe shoot for a matinee so there's less of a chance of crowds. And if you feel uncomfortable at any point with how many people are there and how much they might be exhaling while shoveling popcorn into their mouths, just leave. They're already should be taking a myriad of safety precautions, including spacing people apart. These theaters are going to play these movies whether anyone shows up or not. so you might as well find a time that works for you. But until then, wash your hands, and I'm not going to watch the New Mutants.